Greetings, amigops and top teners everywhere. This is Mike from Top 10 with Kyle and Mike. I am joined this week, as I am every week, by our Patagonian, our bearded, our hotel-staying, coil bed shaking with his farts co-host, Kyle. Kyle is looking lovely as usual this evening, and he has a topic. We're going to talk about that topic. I don't know what the hell this topic is. We are going to debate it vigorously over the course of an episode that is hopefully a manageable length, certainly not going to be a manageable data size. And by the end of that episode, we will have a definitive top 10. K-Dog, what are we talking about this evening?
Yes, Mike, as you said, I am in a hotel. I had shared with you right before we started that I farted and I'm sitting on the bed and I was actually able to feel the coils reverberate beneath me, which was a unique feeling. It was the first time for me. I enjoyed it quite a bit.
I think I remember seeing that on a Sealy advertisement, that's the mark of a good high quality bed. You know how they show like a little kid jumping on a bed with a glass of water and the water doesn't spill?
Yes.
I could have sworn that. You know how they do
kind
like
of the same concept.
Yeah, they do the good bed and the bad bed. I think the bad bed they show a CGI sort of graphic of a man farting with like instead of hearing it, you see the little noise waves, and then you see the bed shake, and then they show the high quality bed where something like that would never happen. I think that's my recollection.
Well, that's the kind of bed I'm on.
Tough.
So that's where I'm at. As far as this podcast goes...
Yes, please.
So, the other night, the wife and I, we went over to our dear friends, Dylan and Tatum. Mm-hmm. Dylan has been on the pod before. Tatum has not been. And we were eating dinner, and they were telling us about... or Tatum was telling us about, rather, their new neighbors.
Okay.
Or maybe it was their old neighbor. I think it was her old neighbor. And how annoying she was, and she always wanted her to pet the stupid rabbit, and Tatum didn't want to pet the rabbit, and there was like this older couple that had like a dog they couldn't control, and just like all this stuff. And I was thinking, wow, those are bad neighbors. And then I thought, well, what if I did a podcast about the top 10 best neighbors? So we're doing a podcast that is the top 10 best neighbors. And what's interesting is that 9, and I think it's just because this this type of character just makes sense in this format. Mm-hmm. 9 out of our 10, in fact, the top 9 on my list are from TV shows.
I was going to say the classic sitcom neighbor is big.
Yeah. So that's what we'll be doing today. We're going to be talking about neighbors.
This is a joyous thing. I want to just go back a second here and talk about Tatum really quickly. So Dylan and Tatum stayed at my place. I actually have no recollection now of when that was. I don't know. Let's just say a couple months back. I think it was a couple months back. And the listeners of the pod know that I have 2 cats. Tatum doesn't like cats. I think she might even be allergic to cats. So here's what I did. I kept them out of the room where she was staying because I considered that a courteous thing to do. I wouldn't pick up one of those cats and throw it at her and then push some peer pressure on her to touch said cats. I find that to be a very strange form of peer pressure to try to make somebody touch your rabbit. Like that is an intensely odd thing to me. And I can't really understand what anybody would get out of that exchange. Other than I suppose the rabbit gets pet.
I don't know, like, yeah, the rabbit's happy.
Yeah.
I mean, like, I think that people they don't, like, this rabbit owner, I think, probably thought that her rabbit was like people will stop on the street to pet a dog, right?
Yeah.
But no one's going to stop you on the street to pet your rabbit. They're not the same. But I feel like some people that own rabbits kind of have this thing.
It's a little bit of an inferiority complex, probably, because they wish they had a dog.
I guess. I think they just, like, they're like, well, people like petting dogs, people like petting rabbits, but it's just not the same.
I would also, before we get back to I have one more detour for us. I want to correct the record quickly so that Allegius, wife of the pod, doesn't get angry. Also, Dylan, there was a guy on Miami Beach when we were at the NCAA national championship in 2013 who was actually walking a rabbit on a leash, and people were stopping him to pet that rabbit. I also think he may have, against all the laws of gods and men, been giving this rabbit booze. So there was a lot going on. So this rabbit was definitely, people like were stopping to pet this thing.
Yeah, but everyone there was drunk off their ass, so it's a little different.
That is true. At any rate, so I want to talk briefly about the ground rules here, because I'm thinking of some classic television neighbors. My sense of this list is that it might be somewhat akin to the dinner party list, which is that you're kind of looking for a certain mix, that it's not necessarily all the nicest neighbors or the most courteous neighbors. It's more like if you were building a neighborhood, you got to get just the right mix of neighbors.
Yeah, so like, you don't like, just being like a really good neighbor isn't necessarily going to put you high on this list. You have to have like, because like sometimes the best neighbors are kind of annoying, and like sometimes like the best neighbors can get you into some situations you wouldn't have put yourself in otherwise, or like, you'll see what I mean when we get further along.
I'll just say, for example, I'd love to have a neighbor who is always presenting like interesting business ideas to me. Getting me involved in his personal life in ways that are strange, introducing me to his wide array of interesting friends. Like, that would be a neighbor I'd love to have.
Even if at times that neighbor was a bit of a mooch, or sometimes got you into situations that you didn't want to be in.
Occasionally.
Now, I'm just saying a neighbor like that might find himself or herself on this list, or maybe even high on it.
Yeah.
So,
okay.
Qualities like that wouldn't necessarily preclude someone from a list like this.
Gotcha. Interesting, because I think it's all about, different strokes. We got to have different strokes.
I agree.
And not the television show Different Strokes.
No.
It's a great program, though.
No, undoubtedly.
Yeah.
So, we'll get right into it. This is the only neighbor that is not a product of a television show. Mm-hmm. Although, she is from a serialized novel series, or a series of novels.
Okay.
Number 10 is Arabella Fig, also known as Miss Fig.
The moment you said novels, I was like, this has got to be Miss Fig.
It is Miss Fig. For those of you who are not Harry Potter fans,
yeah,
Miss Fig is the batty, old, cat-loving, boring, dry, just the worst neighbor that lives across the street from the Dursleys and watches Harry often when the Dursleys are out and about. Or so we think. It is revealed, spoilers, it is revealed in Harry Potter 5, Order of the Phoenix, that Miss Fig is, in fact, a squib.
Yep.
AKA someone who has magical parents but does not have a magical bone in their body. Her big claim to fame is that she helped Harry and Dudley escape some Dementoids.
Yes.
And beats the living poop out of Mundungus Fletcher with her handbag.
You gotta watch out for that handbag. One other thing I want to note about Miss Fig that I think is very important is that she's always wearing her carpet slippers, which
yes.
I think might be a British term, but it's important that people are picturing the right thing. Those are those sort of fluffy slippers that look like one of the toilet seat covers that your like weird uncle had in 1995. So that's very important. I also just want to go back to one other thing. I'm sure I want to say we've talked about it on this, but for any listeners who don't know, the term squib is just one of my favorites in those books, because a squib refers to a bullet or a firework that doesn't actually go off properly. And it's just such a perfect term in a just very Rowling-esque world for a magical person who doesn't really have any control over their magic, or really, doesn't have a lot of magical ability. It's just so perfect. I love that term. Didn't want to let it pass.
It's a great term. It's another example of a Grammy joke, just killing it.
Damn right. But Miss Fig, just to talk about her for a second, she's intensely loyal. Like you said, she's batty. She's funky. She's funny in the context of the story, but like within the story itself, she's always there for Harry. Like, she really goes to bat for him in a way that, you might not understand at first. Over time, it reveals itself, but she steps up.
The only bummer is that she didn't feel like she could tell Harry that she was actually on his side for a long time, which meant that he had to just kind of suffer through looking at pictures of her cats.
All of them. Although that's great commitment to the cause. She didn't get weak and reveal herself to him. I think that was very Dumbledorian to keep her identity secret.
Just like Ned Stark promised Lyanna, so too did Miss Fig promise to Dumbledore.
Promise me, Dumbly.
Promise me, Arabella.
Promise me
Arabella Fig.
You'll set in motion this storyline that really never pays off at all.
Yeah, I just realized that the song Arabella by the Arctic Monkeys is probably about Miss Fig.
Most likely. Also, I want to... We're getting a little off topic, but this is fine. Speaking of Arabella, one of my friends recently retweeted something about... it was like, number of times I've imagined having sex to the Arctic Monkeys. Like, 1,000. Number of times I've actually had sex to the Arctic Monkeys. 0. And I just really enjoyed that because it made me think of you and I harmonizing to Arabella and like singing that to each other.
And Caroline being right next to us being like,
This is weird. I feel like I'm intruding on a romantic moment.
Yeah. Prolonged eye contact.
Like too much eye contact.
Oh, far too much.
Yeah. All right. Number 9.
For more on the Arctic Monkeys, the episode.
Yeah, whatever. Insert number later.
Yeah. All right. That was number 10.
Yeah.
Number 9 is one of my favorite neighbors. I just don't know how many people know about this particular neighbor. This is Wilson from Home Improvement.
Ugh. This is just one
you watched Home Improvement?
Oh, hells yes. Wilson is a classic secondary character and one of the first people I think of when I think of a sitcom neighbor.
So, if you haven't watched Home Improvement, it's a Tim Allen vehicle. He lives in the Metro Detroit area. He has 3 rambunctious...
Including Jonathan Taylor Thomas.
That's right. He has a sassy wife. Mm-hmm. He has a big bearded buddy who does tool time with Tim Taylor. With him.
Classic Al Borland.
Big Al Borland.
Mm-hmm.
And perhaps most importantly, he has a fantastic neighbor by the name of Wilson.
Now, Kyle, tell us about Wilson and tell us if there is a joke that they make on the show that they sustain essentially the entire time and possibly the entire time.
They do it the whole time. So there's a fence between Tim's backyard and Wilson's backyard.
Wait, can I pause you real quick? It's really important that you're picturing, if you haven't seen Home Improvement, we are not talking about an actual outdoor scene shot. This is a studio set, and it is so obviously a studio set. It's incredible how obvious it is. It's so great. Even in the context of 90s sitcoms, they had to know how ridiculous this looked. Continue.
So they've got one of those like wooden fences with no spaces in between. The slats
probably
are all
only
right
like
next
3
to each
feet
other.
wide because they got it all in the shot.
They only needed the one spot.
Yeah.
But any time that Tim has something like really he needs to think about this or kind of ponder it, he'll step into his backyard and guaranteed Wilson is there chopping wood or like building or doing something. You can't see what he's doing because the fence is in the way, but he'll always come up to the fence and you'll just see like his nose up. You never see his mouth. It's just his nose and his eyes and his like floppy hat that he wears.
Yeah, he big into the fisherman's hat.
He loves the fisherman's hat, and he'll just kind of like shoot the shit with Tim and like give him whatever sage advice Wilson is like very much a father figure to Tim, and he always says "Heidi ho there, good neighbor." Like that's his line.
Oh, he's so great. And I think it's worth noting that the commitment to this joke extends to certain even funnier scenarios where he's not behind the fence and somehow he manages to still have something in front of his face. So like there's every once in a while, maybe once a season, he's out from the fence, but something else covers his face, and it's really wonderful.
it's a stellar bit.
Yeah.
It's and if we were ranking my personal favorite neighbors, Wilson would be top 3.
Yeah.
Because I really like Home Improvement, and I really like Wilson, and I kind of hope that someday, if I ever own a home, I have a neighbor like him.
Yeah, I'm right there with you, my friend, because Wilson's kind of got it all. He's there, but he's not intrusive because he doesn't really cross that fence very often. And he offers so much quality advice. I would be surprised if he ever offers Tim bad advice on the television program. It's always good, and it's always just what Tim needs.
For that reason, he's a great neighbor.
Word.
That brings us to number 8.
Mm-hmm.
Number 8 is one of your all-time favorites.
Okay.
I think you probably... So number 8 is from a show called Even Stevens.
Oh.
Number 8 is a young man named Beans.
Are you referring to a young man named Bernard Arangarin?
Yeah. I knew you would know his actual name.
Beans is just one of the all-time great characters in television history. He is the perfect comedic foil to one of the funniest people this planet has ever produced. Like, Shia LaBeouf is a constant disappointment to me. There's probably not a star on this planet who I'm more bummed about than Shia LaBeouf. He's doing those weird movies where he's having unsimulated sex scenes. He's got all these weird tattoos now, which is fine. Have as many tattoos as you want, but be like, you have to be Louis Stevens because you were born to be Louis Stevens. And he brings along Beans on all of these scams he's running. And if I'm not mistaken, Beans calls him Mr. Stevens, right? Like,
You're right.
He like looks up to him as a role model, which is just very misguided on the part of Beans. But I haven't described Beans at all. Do you want to give the listeners like some background on Beans? Because right now all they know is the name.
I would like you to do it, just because you first of all, I think you know Beans better than I do, but you also love him far more than I do.
I do love Beans. So the setup on the show is Louis Stevens is like, I don't know, 15 or 16 years old. He's in middle school, high school. He's just doing his thing. He's a total goofball. He's always up to no good. He's always up to some scam. And every once in a while, into his home with no warning wanders Bernard Arangarin, who's their like 7-year-old neighbor, and he just tries to follow Louis around and get involved in whatever he's up to. Like, one time they dig for buried treasure under the house, and he gets involved in this, and he's wearing a headlamp and crawling under the house. He is, I would say without question, and I can say this comfortably now because he's now an adult, the most unfortunate looking child I've ever seen.
It's too bad.
It's tough. He looked like he was 40 when he was 10, and he looks like he's 10 now that he's 40, which is a tough inversion. It's really not worked very well for him at either phase. He's rather short and sort of plumpish, and he has a kind of a lisp. He's really something to look at and to listen to, and man, they really lean into it on the show.
Yeah, they know what they have, and it really works on the show. It should be
damn
said.
right. He's probably not a particularly high quality neighbor to get like a cup of sugar from, but in the context of Even Stevens, I am Louis Stevens, and I'm looking for a unquestioning sidekick to help me with my shenanigans. Beans is number 1 on my draft board.
Yeah, so sometimes a neighbor needs to fill the role of advice giver and sugar giver, but sometimes a neighbor is just there to kind of do stuff with you. You know, like, especially for a kid. Like, as a kid, you don't want a neighbor that's going to give you well, you might a little further on.
Yeah.
But sometimes you just need a PIC.
Word.
Partner in crime.
Oh, yeah.
For those of you who have not seen Role Models, and shame on you if you have not.
I'm trying to think if there are any neighbors in that movie, because I want to talk about role models.
We'll just do a Role Models podcast one. We'll do a movie review, top 10 on Role Models.
Top 10 things that look like boobies.
Think I didn't notice those mountains over there?
Those double cannons over there?
Well, So that brought us through number 8,
Yep.
which means that it's time for a very special segment we call the Not Top 3.
How will we know the not top 3 has started?
Well, usually Kevin plays the Not Top 3 theme music,
Mm-hmm.
and in order for him to do that, someone needs to shout, "Play that Not Top 3 music!"
Now, does that count as you're saying it, do you think? Or do you have to say it again?
I think just the one time should do it.
Okay, all right, we'll count it. Thanks, Cav. You're the best.
Thanks, Kev.
Yeah.
So, the Not Top 3. The first is from a film aptly titled Neighbors.
Mm-hmm.
Did you see Neighbors, Mike?
I did see Neighbors.
It's actually a very good movie.
It is quite a good
It's
movie.
really funny. So in it, Seth Rogen and his wife, they are looking to buy a house, or they purchase it or something, and then they realize that they've moved in right next to a frat house.
Yeah, it's a tough break.
And so their neighbors are a bunch of frat stars, one of which is Teddy Sanders, portrayed by the very lovely Zac Efron.
Yep.
And he's a real pain in the ass.
Mm-hmm.
He does a lot of annoying stuff. So I thought that put him pretty squarely in the not top 3.
Totally.
Even though he has a very redemptive arc.
I agree. I want to point out that the why the hell can't I think of his name right now? Holy shit, I'm having a brain fart here. To Dave Franco. The Dave Franco character is just so utterly charming and likable. It's too bad that he's associated with that douche nozzle Zac Efron.
He is. That's a good point. He's like a super responsible, super nice guy that I feel like I would get along with really well.
He would have been a good friend. Good friend, good neighbor.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, good point. In fact, maybe he's an honorable mention now for our actual list.
Word.
Next in our not top 3, we have the Bumpuses from A Christmas Story. So the Bumpuses are the neighbors that have like 1,000 dogs. And when they're cooking their Thanksgiving turkey, the Bumpus dogs come over, and it's like a very humorous scene where the dad is like reading the newspaper and the dog will walk by and he puts it down and the dog is gone. And then there's like 19 dogs in their house and they eat the turkey, and the dad goes, "Bumpus!" And he's always yelling out the back door at the Bumpuses to shut the dogs up.
That pack of dogs is just completely absurd and really wonderful.
And it speaks to a real truth. There's nothing worse than a neighbor that can't keep their dog from barking.
Yeah.
It's the worst.
Yeah. So very disruptive.
Ugh. That's one of the worst neighbor sins you can commit. And the diamond of our not top 3 neighbors is from a show called Fairly Odd Parents. Of course, I'm referencing Dinkelberg. If you didn't watch Fairly Odd Parents, that's a shame, but Dinkelberg is the guy that lives next door to the Turners, and he has a long-standing rivalry with Timmy's dad. He seems to outdo him at every turn.
Yeah, that's tough. You never want to have the neighbor who makes you look so much worse by comparison. And am I remembering correctly, or does Timmy's mom have a crush on Dinkelberg?
I don't remember. That might be part of
For
it.
some reason, I feel like that's an element of their rivalry.
It very well could be. I just know that anytime anything... like, it's probably once every 2, 11-minute episodes where Timmy's dad goes, "Dinkelberg." It's like... It's also the perfect name for, a neighbor you don't like.
Yeah, I mean, it does have Dink in it.
Yes, it's true.
I've actually got a couple not tops that I might want to throw out there that I am feeling pretty confident are not in your tops. May I?
I hope not. Yeah, go for it.
Do you have any of The Simpsons coming up?
Yes, I have one character from The Simpsons.
All right, so I'm going to leave that off. I want to note Andy, when he lives in the pit, is a pretty terrible neighbor to Anne on Parks and Rec. He's in love with her. He's always fighting with the rats or the possums who aren't very good at sharing. He's always singing and listening to his own music. He then files a lawsuit after he gets a bunch of dirt dumped on him. So Andy was a bad neighbor when he was living in the pit.
Terrible.
The banjo playing couple from the movie The Promotion that we were just watching with Jerry. These people are constantly having sex on the other side of very thin walls while playing the banjo. That's tough. That's really tough. But I think probably the worst neighbors I can possibly think of are the British brother and sister from Bridesmaids with the disgusting tattoo that gets all infected, and they take baths together, and she pours all those peas on her bad tattoo, and they're always asking for money. Oh God, I can't imagine a worse neighbor than them.
They are terrible neighbors. You're right. They suck.
Not great.
Good picks. You had your own not top 3 there.
Yeah.
All right. Number 7 is a trio of neighbors. I don't know how exactly their homes are oriented around our primary character's home, but I am talking about the town of Quahog, where Cleveland, Joe, and Quagmire are all neighbors to Mr. Peter Griffin.
3 of my favorites. I'm trying to think. That's an interesting point, because this show it's very much styled of like the old-fashioned multi-camera studio shows, even though obviously it's animated and they can do whatever they want. And one of the funniest things about those shows, which I'm now kind of looking back at and sensing is a little bit of a theme here, is there's really no sense of how anything relates to other things. Like, getting from point A to point B in those shows is never explained.
Even though, like, you feel like you know your way around Quahog because you know all the different places in it.
Yes.
Like the Drunken Clam or whatever. But I'm pretty sure that Joe is Peter's, like, immediate next door neighbor on the same side of the street. That feels right
to me.
And
yeah.
I think, and Cleveland lives across the street.
Ooh, I'm now thinking that Joe might live across the street too, because I'm having a very vivid recollection of one of Peter's many crashes into Joe. Quick, to the engine, Peter!
Peter, where do you get these things?
When he has all of his various things that crash into Joe. Oh my God! Oh God! When he has the helicopter spin out of control, chewing up his lawn. It's the Peter copter that has Peter's face on the helicopter for some reason.
Yes.
It's like, I don't know. I feel like he might be across the street, but we definitely know Cleveland is across the street.
Yes, because we've seen Cleveland's bats being interrupted by Peter's shenanigans many a time.
It's always Peter's shenanigans, and it's always the bath.
Like when he's riding the giraffe, and I gotta stop taking my bath during Peter's shenanigans.
That's good, Cleveland. Yeah, but it remains, regardless of how they're oriented, and of course Quagmire, who I feel like he's farther down on their side of the street. We're probably totally wrong on all of this.
Yeah.
All that matters is they are quite a neighborhood.
Yeah, and I think it's also important to note that they function, like, largely as just Peter's friends, and they happen to live near. Like, I think it's funny because, like, for a kid, it makes sense that your friends are the people that live near you. But when you're an adult, you're not really limited to just people whose house you can walk to, which is why I think it's so funny that Peter's 3 best friends are guys that live across the street from him.
It feels very indicative of Peter, like, just generally.
Like, he just walked into their house one day without invitation and they became friends.
Yeah, he was just there to get some Pawtucket Pat.
Yeah. So they're very important parts of that show, and they're good neighbors and friends.
Yeah, they're great neighbors within the context of the show and outside the context of the show for us, because they're hilarious.
Correct. So number 6 is... he's a great neighbor, and also kind of the worst. Number 6 is Mr. Feeney from Boy Meets World.
You know who's still alive?
Feeney?
Yeah, the actor who portrays Mr. Feeney, if I'm not mistaken, is still alive. I feel like he came up... Hold up, I'm going to Google this. Keep talking. I'm going to quietly type.
If you didn't watch Boy Meets World, first of all, go ahead and get back to that well. But, so our protagonist, Corey, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's Corey and Topanga.
Corey Matthews, yep.
Lives with his family in a home. His next door neighbor, Mr. Feeney, is also his high school principal or math teacher or what is...
He's a teacher, yeah.
So he lives next door to his teacher, which like obviously like leads to a bunch of like problematic interactions where
that dog ate my homework situation is tough to pull off when the neighbor knows you don't have a dog.
That's funny, Corey, because I don't seem to recall your family having a pet dog. And
yeah.
Feeney's like very prim and proper, you know, like you'd expect a teacher to be. But it also like there's kind of like teacher Feeney and then neighbor Feeney, and like oftentimes neighbor Feeney will like give Corey like really sound advice, and then like sometimes will even like kind of like play devil's advocate when he turns back into teacher Feeney at school. And
totally,
he's an extremely competent mentor, but it's just like it's a very strange like dynamic between a kid and his neighbor and teacher that I don't know if has ever been replicated elsewhere. So and I remember like always thinking like I couldn't decide if I would want a neighbor like Mr. Feeney or not.
It's a good question, and I think it's indicative of where the characters are in the context of the show. Like they're at an age where this would be both a dream and a nightmare. But I think it's interesting what you say about you don't know if this has ever been recreated, because in fact it is recreated in crazier fashion on this same show, because there's an English teacher, I think it is, the guy with the long hair, who adopts Sean.
Oh my god, you're totally right.
Yes.
Wow.
So this is actually only the second, like, craziest, most improbable teacher-student relationship on this show. But I want to just say a few things about Mr. Feeney. One is Mr. Feeney has got an impeccably trimmed mustache. Like, Barty Crouch Sr. would be jealous.
Barty Crouch Jr. would not care.
No, Barty Crouch Jr. would not care. His blood is not pure enough.
No.
He rocks the sweater vest game like nobody's business. He rocks that under a tweed blazer. It's too much. But the most important thing about Mr. Feeney, he fucks. As the show establishes very clearly later in the show, he's like a classic Latin lover. He's got this older lady he wines and dines and dances with, and he gets it on. So I think those are some great things about the Fiendster. But one thing, like, as a show matter that I think is cool is they never really jump the shark with Feeney, other than obviously, you know, the kind of central premise. They keep it within reason. He doesn't change too much as a character, but he also doesn't get too exaggerated. I think they do a really nice job. He's just always a guy who's kind of trying to do his best for his students and is really wise and gives good advice, like you said.
He's super steady, and that's like one of the most important qualities a neighbor can have, really.
Yeah, totally.
So, that was Mr. Feeney. I love when Corey says Feeney.
Yeah.
So, all right. Number 5 is a very famous neighbor. She plays the role. She's interesting. She occupies a couple of roles on this show. Number 5, of course, is Kimmy Gibbler of Full House fame.
I had a moment there where I was really worried you were going to do a Friends thing, and I was like, This can't be. There's no way we're about to do Friends. This is a non-Friends podcast.
Friends, no character from Friends appears on this list.
Even if we did a podcast, best shows set in New York, where every episode they go to a coffee shop, it would be Seinfeld 1 to 10 before we put Friends in at one of those slots.
You really hate Friends. I'm kind of ambivalent towards it.
Which means this podcast, on average, really hates Friends.
Yeah. So, Kimmy Gibbler, though.
Wait, I want to finish. No, I'm back on Friends before you go to Kimmy Gibbler.
Yeah,
I'm realizing that very soon I'm going to be the 50% owner of the complete Friends DVD set, and I'm really alarmed by this.
How do you know that? Like, are you like,
I stand to take on ownership of Caroline's Things, at least 50% ownership, and she is the very proud owner of a complete set of Friends DVDs.
I was so confused. I thought you meant like you were anticipating like becoming the owner of it. Like it was in neither of your possessions, and for some reason you knew that it was coming.
No, that would never happen.
That makes way more sense that she already owns it, and now you are about to inherit half of her properties.
Yeah, not into that. I hope that Caroline gets charged a gift tax. I hope that this is a taxable exchange.
Is Caroline a Friends person?
Oh God, yes.
Wow, I didn't know that about her. It doesn't.
I know, it's really upsetting, isn't it?
No, not really at all. A lot of my favorite people are Friends people. Like Dylan and Tatum love it. Caroline loves it, apparently.
Yeah, but I hate Caroline, Dylan, and Tatum.
Okay, well,
yeah.
I'm afraid to watch. I probably just can't ever watch Friends because I'd probably like
don't, because if you accidentally like it, we're gonna have a problem.
I just like Jennifer Aniston so much that I have a hard time not liking a show she was on.
You know what you should do instead of watching her on that show? Just Google still images of her erect nipples, because that's her entire role in that show.
I do that already, but I'm saying
I know. Like, they throw ice cubes at her before they send her out braless in a 90s tight-fitting t-shirt. That's all she does on the show.
Yeah, I mean, if you have something...
They realized what they had. It's like a certain neighbor who I'm betting is going to come up later. Once a show realizes it has something, it really just, it rolls with it.
Yes, you will. You will find that is true.
All right, so the Gibbler.
The Gibbler. So the Gibbler functions as like DJ's best friend. So you've got the best friend neighbor, but she's also a pest. Like she's kind of like Dennis the Menace. Like Bob Saget really. I think it's like kind of all three of them. Like Bob Saget and Dave Coulier and John Stamos all are really irritated by her. John Stamos, and she's also a pest to little Stephanie. Like they don't really get on either.
Actually, like, with hilarious consequences. That's one of my favorite relationships on the show.
Yeah, it's wonderful. And, by the way, this is, like, very much excluding Fuller House. I will not watch that. So,
to quote our friends in Binge Mode, not canon.
Not canon. So, whatever happens in that show, I don't care. In the original show, Kimmy... It's kind of funny because she doesn't really have, like, a really strong redemptive arc. Like... She's like an annoying kid that turns into like a problematic friend. And like she mostly just functions as a way to like get DJ to make hard choices, and like basically she's the wrong path that like DJ has to kind of get off of.
It is a very interesting point because they sort of set her up for this really dark path, because they heavily implied that her family life is very messed up, like in ways that are not that funny. And then they sort of forget about this for a while. DJ gets other friends, like, no, Stephanie's the one who has the friend Tia. But at any rate, she has like other people who are tempting her to do bad things, and they sort of don't make Kimmy into that character fully. But then, later on, they make it clear that things are really not going well. Like when she elopes with Dwayne. Whatever. And I think, if I'm remembering correctly, I actually think there's a really heartfelt interaction between her and DJ where she tells DJ, like, I don't have a future. I'm doing this because I know I'm not going to go anywhere like you are. I'm remembering that correctly, I think. Yeah, and I remember it being a big... kind of interesting, sad realization for this character who's always been played for laughs, but who the show does imply at times is kind of the counterpoint to this really sheltered, very upper middle class life that, you know, DJ's living.
Yeah, I mean, she's a good avatar for like every audience member's like childhood friend that was like probably not a great influence. That's not entirely fair, because like Kimmy is also a good friend a lot of the time. Yeah. But just like the friend that your parents didn't want you to hang out with, and then but in this case she happened to live next door, so it's like, well, what are you gonna do?
Yeah, it's like Jim's friend who he's too dumb to hang out with on The Office. Remember he tells the friend that he's too dumb to hang out with because his mom told him he should try to hang out with kids.
Oh yeah, and then he sees
he sees him. It's great. A very important thing about Kimmy that we haven't even mentioned yet is, if I'm remembering correctly, at one point she has an ostrich, which is portrayed by a puppet, which is very clearly a puppet, and which sort of does a Wilson thing where it just pops its head over the fence. I'm remembering all that correctly, I believe.
I think you're right. What's interesting is that you actually never see like Kimmy's house. You don't even see it from the perspective of the Tanner household.
Yeah.
She just like has that famous like she just comes in the door and they're like, "Oh my god, Kimmy," you know.
Yeah. Kimmy definitely did have an ostrich, I'm seeing now.
Okay.
And I think what's interesting is, like, with the actual physical home, we never enter it. We really don't get almost any insight into her family life either. Like, we know that the family likes wrestling. That comes up a lot. But what's actually going on in the Gibbler household is pretty unclear.
Yeah. I think, like, occasionally you'll hear, like, her mom yelling from, like, across the way or something. Oh, yep, there's the ostrich. I see that now.
Yeah.
Also, wow, look at this hair.
Yeah, it's really something, isn't it?
Very 90s. Oh, yeah, the episode where she pierces Stephanie's ears. Man,
Oh, yeah.
that was a good show.
It's a terrific show. It's weird. Contemporary reviews of Full House were not positive.
It definitely aged, obviously, well enough that they needed to reboot it, but... All right. That's a nice trip down memory lane.
That is. Thank you, Kimmy.
That brings us to number 4. This is, I don't know how I am, like, penalizing myself for, like, sometimes only picking one person and sometimes picking more than one. Number 4 is 2 neighbors that live on either side of our protagonist's house, or in this case, a pineapple. Number 4 are Patrick Star and Squidward tennis balls. Tent poles. Tentacles. Now,
I don't think you can separate them. You can separate them as characters, but you can't separate them as neighbors, because I think most every neighborly interaction that occurs is either SpongeBob and Patrick to Squidward, or the 3 of them.
Yeah, and Squidward is like the ultimate portrayal of like the neighbor that just is annoyed. Like the way like Squidward is more annoyed by SpongeBob and Patrick than Danny Tanner is of Kimmy Gibbler, right? Like,
by a factor of 10.
Like the reef blower and all that's, you know, the box, the imagination box.
The box is one of the greatest episodes of television ever, and his opening up the box and seeing SpongeBob and Patrick go beep beep ooh ah.
I love what he
is
says.
One of the great reveals in television history.
When they're, it sounds like they're rock climbing, and Squidward like knocks on the box and there's an avalanche, and he opens it up. He goes, "How are you doing that?" And SpongeBob's just sitting there, and he goes, "First, we establish a base camp at 13,000 feet."
It's so great. And then he gets in the box, and the garbage truck takes him away, and he thinks it's working.
I hope Squid's not too down in the dumps today. If you're enjoying this trip down, quoting SpongeBob episodes, stay tuned. Good friend of the pod, Ian, is working on a SpongeBob-centric episode. Just a little teaser for you.
And it figures to be a classic.
Undoubtedly. But to the matter... So Squidward is, I think, one of the greatest like TV character creations of all time. Like, you could probably do a top 10 of just like times that SpongeBob and Patrick annoyed Squidward as neighbors. Which
I'm willing to bet that would be a robust top 10.
Yeah. So, like, they get a ton of points for just being the perfect kind of annoying neighbor combo. But even if you just isolate the relationship between SpongeBob and Patrick, you've got the classic best friend neighbor. They live like you can't see SpongeBob's house without seeing either of theirs, and I really think that like the visual of seeing a rock and a pineapple and the totem head next to each other like that is the greatest lineup of houses in history.
I think, like, yes, they all work individually, but they all just work so much better together. I think they all heighten each other so much. Each of those characters makes the other one better, and as a threesome, it doesn't get funnier because Patrick makes SpongeBob so much more annoying, and Squidward makes SpongeBob so much more annoying, and certainly makes Patrick more annoying. Like they and to make sure we pass out the blame fairly, SpongeBob and Patrick make Squidward much more annoying.
Right. Yeah, like Squid is pretty much insufferable when he's around SpongeBob and Patrick because he's so stuffy.
Mm-hmm.
Like the episode where he moves to Tentacle Acres. Remember that one?
You know, it's funny. I actually do remember that one a little bit. It might be because I remember. I don't think I was aware of OJ yet, but I do remember the concept of gated communities coming up, and this show like reinforcing the idea of the gated community, because I never really understood that concept because I'm from Massachusetts. That's like a gated community doesn't exist. Our communities were not planned, they just happened. And I remember thinking it was so amusing that Squidward was such a dickweed that he wanted to live in a gated community.
Well, that is the idea, but
yeah,
it makes his ultimate turn into a reef blowing doofus even more satisfying.
Yeah.
So that's Patrick and Squidward. Now I'll do some honorable mentions.
Yeah, let her rip.
An honorable mention, one of our favorite characters now, Gary from Game Night.
Yeah, he was really something.
If you haven't seen Game Night, check that out.
Yep.
I threw Spider-Man on here just because he's a friendly neighborhood Spider-Man. I thought
it's true. He's a great neighbor.
Yeah, I thought he warranted consideration, at least as a technicality.
Mm-hmm. He's probably number one on the includes technicalities list.
Yeah. Oh, for sure.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I have here the Kids Next Door. They're literally called the Kids Next Door.
It's true. Next door to whom we don't really know. I don't think so.
They all live next door to each other, we think.
True.
That's a fun one. I have here Mr. Myrtle of Sandlot fame, aka James Earl Jones.
Yep, Mufasa, baby.
Yep, he fills the role of like the scary neighbor really well.
Yeah,
or the misunderstood neighbor.
Yes, which is a classic 80s 90s trope, is the misunderstood neighbor, and he's a really good example of that.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Lastly, I would be shunned by my brother if I did not mention Ricky from Trailer Park Boys. Did you ever watch Trailer Park Boys? I'm
aware of its existence, but no.
It's not Rocket Appliances, Mike. Ricky is Julian's just absolute doofus. He's also his best friend, like trailer park neighbor, and he's such an idiot. But he's really endearing, and I like him a lot. But my favorite habit of his is he just doesn't bungles phraseology just a little bit. Like it's not Rocket Appliances, Julian, or he'll say, Ricky, or what goes around is all around. It's like stupid shit like that. So, I think technically their trailers don't abut, so he's not a next door neighbor, but they live in the same establishment or the same neighborhood. So I think
we'll call them neighbors. That's fair. Yeah. I got one that I'm 100% confident is not going to be in your top three. Mr. Robitussin from Princess Diaries.
Oh,
he's the guy who's writing his soap operas, and he's like the super snooty author who's always out in his bathrobe doing the, taking out the trash or whatever. That's so I'm a big fan of Mr. Robitussin. I get another one which I think is not going to come up. The King of the Hill gang.
Yeah.
They're great neighbors. They're like really great neighbors. They're exactly what they all need. They're just there for each other. They really don't ask a lot of each other, but they're buddies and they're there for each other, and I like it.
I also like to think that any one of them would lend any other of them their lawnmower with no questions asked.
They absolutely would. No questions asked.
Though I don't think that any of them would ever have cause to borrow a lawnmower.
No. So. They certainly, what I know for sure is they wouldn't go to the roller rink. They wouldn't do anything about dancing.
No, they would not go to the plaza.
You know the thing about the plaza, Kyle.
You could make money dancing there?
You could, but it's a place of debauchery. And sin.
That's an oldie but a goodie.
It is an oldie but a goodie. All right, number 3.
Number 3. So, I think you were thinking this guy might end up closer to our not top 3. I had Ned Flanders at number 3. And
totally doodly.
Howdy doodly there, neighbor. And the reason is because he fills a very important kind of niche for neighbor in that he's like the annoying like ideal picture of suburbanism, like the finely manicured lawn, the self-righteousness, the
perfect children, Rod and Todd.
Yeah, but he's also like, despite how awful Homer is to him and how much he hates him, like he's nothing but kind to the Simpsons.
Nothing.
He's like the kindest person on that entire show. And I just like when this concept came to mind, like he was one of the first ones I thought of. I just think that he's like of all the neighbors, he's probably the most definitely one of the most famous.
Yeah. When I think of Ned Flanders, I think of a couple things. One, obviously, I think of the surface level. You know, he's very religious and he has Rod and Todd and his poor deceased wife, Maud. But I think about the fact that he takes his shirt off like deep into the show's run, and it turns out he is unbelievably yoked. And it's just this hilarious sight gag of this guy who's always in the sweater and the button down with the mustache, and he's like the dorky neighbor, but it turns out he's completely ripped. My other favorite thing is there's an episode where I think he's questioning God. I think his faith has been shaken for some reason.
Oh, no.
And he addresses a letter to God, and he writes it to Jesus H. Christ.
Is that where that comes from?
No, that's the thing. It's that old, like, people said Jesus H. Christ, but when he wrote it out, he's, like, writing it out. It's like, Jesus H. Christ. And it's so good.
He's amazing. The Simpsons is one of those things I wish I was like an uber fan of. Like I wish I was the kind of person that knew everything there was to know about The Simpsons. I think probably the closest person to that in our lives is Alex.
Yeah, Alex is definitely the closest to that I know. There was a time when I could have fallen close to that category, but I've fallen off so much.
I'd like to have Alex on here to do a top 10 minor characters from The Simpsons. I feel like that'd be a good podcast. And also, you'd have hundreds of characters to choose from.
I bet you've seen that T-shirt, right?
Yeah.
You would just poke around the T-shirt.
So my dad's good friend, Mark, he's one of my favorite people ever to see when I was a kid, because he's just like a nerd that grew up. He teaches calculus at high school. And we would go over to his house, and he always had like weird toys and just like cool things. And in his bathroom, he had he and his wife are just like uber Simpsons fans. And in his bathroom, like on the wall directly across from the toilet, is a poster of like every single Simpsons character, and I would find excuses to go into the bathroom. I had to poop like 6 times every time we went over there just so I could look at the poster when I was a kid.
That's such a great like bathroom distraction.
It's a perfect thing to have in a bathroom. The only problem is it's like too good, so you end up like spending 25 minutes in the bathroom, and your dad is like, "You okay in there, Kyle?" And I'm like, "I'm fine."
Just masturbating. It's fine.
Yeah. So, yeah. So that's Ned Flanders. I think even though he's kind of a bit of a prig, he's a famous enough neighbor that he belongs high on the list.
He's also just an excellent neighbor. He is objectively an excellent neighbor. He's one of those like beauties in the eye of the beholder situations. If you don't like Ned, there's the problem is you, not Ned.
Right. Yeah. Like it's clear that there's something wrong with Homer.
Yes.
So that brings us to number 2. You've been alluding to this for a long time. Why don't you tell us about number 2 and why he's such a interesting neighbor?
Well, I'm now totally perplexed as to who's number 1. Because I assumed the whole time this was number one, but I'm presuming number two is Cosmo Kramer.
It is Cosmo Kramer.
Cosmo Kramer is based off of a real guy named Kenny Kramer who lived next door, I think, to Larry David. It might have been Seinfeld, but I think it was Larry David's neighbor. Maybe you've done research, but I think it was LD's real life neighbor who just borrowed his stuff and just kind of never left once he gave him something. And that's Kramer. Like, he's also, his name is different the first episode. I'm forgetting what it is now. What the hell is it? I forget now. But it's not Kramer. So the first, like the pilot episode, he's not called Kramer. And they change his name. And he's
Kessler.
Kessler, that's what it was. Yeah, Kessler was the name of the first episode. He's a mooch. He dresses like, as Elaine would say, a hipster doofus. He has all of these business ideas like Kramerica, where he's going to make these bladders to put around the oil. I don't even know what you'd call it, like the oil hold of a big oil ship, like an oil tanker. He is always sleeping with ladies who are well above his station. He is, as Calvin Klein says to him directly, he's totally without self-consciousness at all. He's just walks around the way he is. He becomes the Marlboro Man. He's just, in all of those ways, he's Kramer, but he's also just an incredibly ridiculous neighbor. He's always making a crazy entrance into Jerry's house.
With the door.
He just starts eating stuff from, out of Jerry's fridge.
Are you gonna eat this, Jerry?
He's always connecting Jerry with other neighbors who Jerry doesn't know or want to know, like Newman. The guy whose name I'm forgetting right now, who has the parrot who they end up killing accidentally. He also puts up everybody's name from the building so that they can all say hello to each other because he thinks it would be a nice thing for them to do. And Jerry ends up getting on a kiss hello routine with this woman, and it ruins his life. And he's just, Kramer is very, very neighborly. He also tries to be an old-fashioned neighbor one time where he's sitting outside in a folding chair playing with sparklers and pretending that there's a night little breeze and tinkling a chime as these completely unseen children are throwing like water balloons at him. He's the epitome of a ridiculous, beloved, but ridiculous neighbor.
See, okay, so there's the key word, I think, because like there is the stereotypical like really annoying neighbor, but he ultimately like is a very important part of Jerry's life, I think, and so that's why it's important. Like, he's like that friend that like if he didn't live right next to Jerry, they probably wouldn't be friends, right? Like, it's definitely a proximity thing, but since he's lived next to him all this time, they've become dear friends, and I think that's important. Like, this forced proximity. Like, you kind of get the sense that with some other people on this list, like Patrick and SpongeBob would have been like buddies anyways, but Jerry and Kramer would not have, probably.
No, but then, like you said, they forge a friendship that's outside of that neighbor, relationship. I just want to say it's important because this is a real phenomenon. I mean, you and I experienced this. One of our best friends, Alex, was Kramer to us. He was this ridiculous neighbor who we liked but couldn't figure out. And then just over time, we're like, holy shit, we really like this guy. Yeah. But for a while, he's just this mysterious person who lived on the same floor as us, popped in and out of our room at his own discretion without asking our permission, and just was there and did weird stuff and then left.
How is it that I've never made that connection?
Oh, yeah, he's our Kramer.
It's so obvious.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yep.
I'm glad he doesn't really listen to this.
No, but the point is, to make the full connection, Jerry and Kramer realize they have a real friendship that continues on beyond this weird initial phase, but that is how they become friends.
Yes. I no longer live anywhere near Alex, but I still consider him one of my dearest friends. So
yes. You're welcome, Alex.
Yeah. All right, so that brings us to number one. Yeah, number one is Mr. Rogers.
Oh, great. Yes. foolishness on my part. It is.
It always
won't you be my neighbor?
Exactly. So, it's not entirely clear like who his actual neighbors are, because the point is that everybody is his neighbor. Maybe it was like last year. I remember specifically it was ahead of I think it was ahead of when I saw Annihilation in theaters, and they played the trailer for the Mr. Rogers documentary.
Yeah.
I never saw the Mr. Rogers documentary. The trailer for the documentary made me cry. It was...
Oh my God.
It was an unbelievably well-crafted trailer, but I think part of what made it so emotional for me was because it just like immediately transported me back to when I was a kid watching Mr. Rogers, and like that being a really big part of my childhood. He's like more so than anyone else on this list, I think, just like the idealized version of like a kindly, well-meaning role model neighbor. Like he's I don't know, I don't think I could really entertain arguments for a different number one on the list.
No, there is no argument, because the fact that documentary is called Won't You Be My Neighbor kind of tells you that it's Mr. Rogers. Like, you actually don't really need much beyond that. The word neighbor is what cues you to it being a Mr. Rogers doc. And it's interesting. It's a dark thought because it comes from a negative place, but it's pretty mind-blowing that Fred Rogers was in the national spotlight for as long as he was, and the character Mr. Rogers has been as well known as he has for so long, and nothing ever came out. Like, he didn't get like a shoving match with somebody one time over a road rage incident. There was nothing, big or crazy. He didn't actually hate German people. Like, there was no weird thing that came out about him, which is hard because people are gunning for a character like this, because this is a character whose, stock in trade is, I'm good, I'm great, I'm the nicest guy around. So people naturally are inclined to try to take that down. And nobody had anything to say about Fred Rogers other than really great things.
Yeah, I remember like the worst thing I'd ever heard about him, and I don't think this is actually true, but like the rumor was getting spread around that the reason he always wore a sweater was because he had like sleeve tattoos on his arms from his time in the war. And I remember as a kid being like, oh my God, like Mr. Rogers has tattoos, and like,
yeah,
that like kind of shook me.
Even that's just a hilarious relic of like a different time.
Right. So like, that's actually a really good point. Like the good standing that Fred Rogers had, kind of keeping in, up with the personification of like Mr. Rogers, the character, is a big part of it.
Yeah. Just to take a different example, like if we were ever to do a best TV dads, there's one who would have been probably number one, who is just not on the list anymore because the real life actor portraying that character is just worthless. And so you can't put him on there because they're so intertwined with the character. Like, I think if the guy who played Wilson, it turned out, he lit fires for fun, it wouldn't be as big of a problem because we don't associate. I don't know what the hell the guy's name is. I couldn't tell you if I tried. But Mr. Rogers depends so much on Fred Rogers as being, a man in good standing in society, and he is and was. It's pretty amazing.
Yeah. I'd like to think if someday I'm considered a good neighbor, at least some portion of my training will be due to my time watching Mr. Rogers. Like, he just taught me interesting things, and he just taught me how to be kind of a good person and not a real shitbag. So
yeah,
I think that, those lessons stay with you.
They do indeed.
That was my list from 10 to 1 of the best neighbors I could think of. Is there anyone I missed here?
This is a weird one because I don't think so. I don't know. This feels like it's a big list, and I feel like there's probably some people we're missing here, but I don't know. I guess you could go with the Jeffersons, right? Like, the Jeffersons are one of the most famous neighbor, families, I guess, from All in the Family. In fact, I think the Jeffersons probably should be on this list.
Yeah, they probably deserve a spot.
Because they had their own show, which was not equally as successful, but close to as successful as All in the Family. So I would say the Jeffersons should be on the list.
Wait, is Malcolm's buddy his neighbor and Malcolm in the middle?
Stevie?
Yeah.
Ooh, I don't know. I think he's just another Krellboyne.
Malcolm.
Won't you be my neighbor?
Why don't they reboot that show?
Just Stevie? The Just Stevie show?
Oh, no. Like, what's Frankie Muniz up to? He can't be that busy.
He's not doing anything. The problem is they wouldn't be able to get Bryan Cranston.
Yeah, you're probably right.
Right?
Maybe they can redo Big Fat Liar. I know Amanda Bynes and Paul Giamatti are not that busy.
Yeah, that's true. And also Paul Giamatti's, like, people's perception of him has changed so much since Billions. So I think it would be fun to have him back in that, but getting dominated.
Yeah. Yeah, paint me blue. All right. We're sufficiently off track.
Honestly, I think the Jeffersons is my only actual addition. I think you did a great job on this list. I feel like people are going to be able to help us with this one.
Yes.
Because I think, but I'm not too bothered by that because this is sort of a pick your own, this is sort of a choose your own adventure from sitcom world, especially.
Yeah, that's true.
So people have stuff. I look forward to hearing what they say, but I think you've covered your bases. I want to throw the Jeffersons in pretty high, but I think Mr. Feeney comes up a little bit higher on the list, and I think Wilson does too, and I think the Jeffersons should place high on the list. But I think you've got the top three for sure.
All right, so let's bang this out. So Mr. Rogers, Kramer, Flanders, Jeffersons.
Yeah, and I'd go Jeffersons 4.
I think Patrick and Squidward stay probably.
Yeah,
I like them at 5.
I agree. Then I think I go Feeney.
Yeah.
Then I think I go Wilson.
Okay.
Then Gibbler.
I can get on board with that. I think part of what is important about this is that I really do is that you see what Mr. Feeney's house looks like, and you see Wilson's fence all the time, and Kimmy Gibbler almost always is just already at the Tanner's house. Mm-hmm. And for some reason, that really helps cement my idea of Feeney and Wilson as neighbors.
Yeah, that's reasonable because theoretically you could replace Kimmy with a school kid, like who's just over a lot because her parents don't love her.
So we need to figure out which of Cleveland Joe, Quagmire, Beans, or Miss Fig we're removing from this list.
I think we probably take Beans off of this list. It pains me to say that out loud.
Wow.
Beans is... But the problem is, Beans is a terrible neighbor.
That's a good point.
If you look within the logic of the show, everybody hates him as a neighbor except Lewis. And if you look outside of the show, I'm basically the only person who holds a candle for Beans. There's not like a big Beans parade going through the streets of Chicago.
Well, there might be, but it's not for this Beans.
Yeah, true.
And Miss Fig is like, as weird as she is, she really was a very, very good neighbor. She saved Harry
she went well above and beyond the Call of Duty.
She saved Harry from Dementoids.
Yeah, you got to look out for those Dementoids.
Yeah, and they run around.
Yeah.
All right. Well, then, I think what we've done is constructed a top 10 list of our favorite neighbors of all time.
I got to tell you, I thoroughly enjoyed this list. I think this is going to be a good list to debate with our friends.
Oh, yeah, we're going to hear about it. But I want to say thanks to Tatum for telling me that story about her neighbor and inspiring this list.
Yeah, thank you, Tater.
Yeah.
And congratulations in a month.
Yes, indeed. I'll tell you what, I'll recap these from 10 to 1, and then we'll say a few, some credits, and then we'll get out of here. How's that?
That sounds like a deal, my friend.
All right. So at number 10, we had Arabella Fig of Privet Drive.
Arabella's got a 70s head.
She's a modern lover, though.
Yeah, she is.
Number 9.
Exploration.
Number 9, Cleveland, Joe and Quagmire, Peter's trio of buddy neighbors. Mm-hmm. Number 8, the ever-present Kimmy Gibbler.
That's a great descriptor.
Yeah. Number 7, Wilson, or just his nose and up. Mm-hmm. He's from Home Improvement. Number 6, Beanie from Boy Meets World. Number 5, Patrick and Squidward, tennis balls of SpongeBob fame. Number 4, the Jeffersons from All in the Family. Number 3, Ned Flanders from The Simpsons. Number 2, Cosmo Kramer of Seinfeld fame. And number 1, everybody's neighbor, Mr. Rogers. That is that, my friend.
That's a beauty.
As we wrap up, I would like to remind everyone that the stankiness you heard earlier is the brainchild of the very famous Kevin MacLeod. He did our Not Top 3 and our theme music. And if you've been enjoying our Visages depicted on our artwork there, don't forget Erin Sant put that together. And you can see more of her stuff on Instagram at Sant Design.
And if you've been enjoying our social media, which has ramped up recently, we got some excellent drawings from our resident engineer Kyle that was posted up there. That was done by the lovely Caroline Labranti. Thank you, Caroline.
Yeah, thanks.
And if you want to check us out on the old social medias, you can check us out at Top 10 KM. That's 10 spelled out TEN on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook. You can send us an email, top10km@gmail.com. Tell us what we did right, more likely what we did wrong, or tell us something you want to talk about. Say, hey guys, I want to come on, teach you something about something. We would love that.
Yeah.
That's what we're looking for, my friends. And we know you're listening on some podcast app, but if you want to try another one, Apple Podcast app, Stitcher, Spotify, Podbean, pretty much wherever podcasts can be found. That's what I got to say, my friend.
Thanks for saying all that, Mike. I appreciate that.
You're welcome. It's all up in my old noodle.
You're getting very good at reciting it.
But it's all in, it's a little bit of a different order. It sounds natural.
Yeah, it doesn't sound canned.
No.
You're killing it, quite frankly.
Thanks. I do what I can.
All right. Well, I'll tell you what. If you're still keen, let's do this again next week.
Sounds good to me, dog.
All right. Later, homie.
Peace.